So welcome to the Advanced Tarot class, second session. Tonight we are going to, I'm going to teach you guys a spread that I use a lot. And it's the spread where it's like I'm using almost half a deck, it seems like. I'm a big card guy, so I like having lots of cards laid out when I do a reading, particularly if I've got one of those clients that sits down and says, I say, well, what would you like a reading about? And they go, I don't know, I just want a reading. And they don't really give you a whole lot to work with. I like this spread because it gives you a lot of cards in several different areas to work with. So hopefully you guys will like it too. For me, it's a nice alternative to the Celtic Cross, which is the other one I use when I don't really have much information on a client, and I would just want to do something. It's a good tool. So we can proceed forward. So like I said, this class is based upon the spread that I'm calling the Medicine Wheel. All right, so here you see the Medicine Wheel is basically Native American sacred space, and they talk about the sacred hoop of life, and that on the hoop there, of course, the circle represents the circle of time, but it also represents the four directions. North is at the top, south is at the bottom, east is on the right side, and west is on the left side. And you can see that little cross there sort of indicating that. And the cross sort of reminds us that sometimes one of the biggest challenges in life is how do we manage the male-female energy of life, the creative energy of life, the sensual, sexual energy of life. How do we manage that? And how do we deal with that in a sacred way so that it doesn't necessarily conflict with the north-south pole of the earth and the heavens, which of course is the sacred path, or what the Native American people, I think, call the Red Road. So the Medicine Wheel represents the cycles of time, cycles of life, and it represents, of course, the four directions. And each of the four directions has a different meaning in the Medicine Wheel spread. So what you're going to see now is the way I start laying out the Medicine Wheel is I start with the first card, laying it sideways, and then it proceeds like this: second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then the inner circle, 17, 18, 19, 20, and then the very center, which is, upright and across. Now, as far as the center goes, I know different readers have different ways of doing it. Sometimes people do the crossing card first and then the vertical card second, or the other way around. I don't even remember exactly which way I do it, but whatever way works for you. And if you think about, if you're aware of what I just showed you there, you can see that there's a circle that's implied in the way these cards are laid out. And also notice the fact that these cards are laid out in a clockwise direction. And that's important. In Native American thinking, they believe that setting intention is done in a clockwise fashion. If you want to set sacred space, you start in the east, which is where the first horizontal card is, and then you proceed around the circle, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, et cetera, going in a clockwise direction. And they also feel like that if you want to undo something, like if you were going to do a ritual to undo a marriage, for instance, you would do a ritual in which you move in a counterclockwise direction. So that's something to be very aware of in terms of the way you work with the energies. And as far as the Eastern Gate being the starting point, well, the sun rises in the east, and that makes the most sense to me, is that where you start. But that's not the way it is in all Native American traditions. In some traditions, they start in the south. I don't believe anybody starts in the west, but I do think that there's some that will do it in a slightly different way. So that's, that's basically what it looks like when you got the table laid out. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice if you look at this spread very carefully is that there's cards that are sort of clustered in the 4 directions. And each of the directions in the Native American thinking has different meanings. The East represents beginnings and endings. Of course, the sun rises in the East, which represents the beginning of a day. And in their thinking, this is a place where you set intention for beginning a new project or something like that. But also notice that as you go around the circle, eventually you return to the East, which is why also the East represents beginnings and endings. The return represents the endings. So you've got 4 cards. So what I did was I actually did a spread using this. I laid out cards using the spread, and what I asked for in this reading was, what is the coming year going to be like? And I asked it in the sense of for America, or or for all of us, not just in a political sense, but in a larger sense. What's the next year going to be like? And the first card out, this is interesting, I think, because it sort of sets the tone for the whole year in terms of where do things begin. And having the Chariot be the first card out, I think is just perfect, because the Chariot's all about movement and change. And then the second card is the Fool card. So I think that sort of implies this idea that in this new year, there's going to be a sense of a new beginning. The Fool represents potential and the beginning of a new direction. And hopefully, I say this, you may disagree with me, but hopefully we'll have a change in political administration this year. I think most of you probably agree with me on that. And that may seem as if it's a great victory to us because of, it's a transition from those that are sort of think more in terms of isolation. And I think that the Democrats and Joe Biden are more about inclusion. But that's not the point. The point you have to think about here is that the Fool reminds us that at the beginning of any journey, we may be in a place of naivete, and we may not fully understand everything that is involved. So, the Chariot represents new beginning, and then the Fool. Now, the card that's on the inside, and you notice that this is one of the 4 cards that are in the inner circle, not the center, but the inner circle. The cards that are in the inner circle represent personal attitudes, what's going on internally with us, what our attitudes might be and how that might be contributing to whatever the reading is about. And I think this is very interesting because the King of Swords, to me, is very much about thinking clearly and using our mind in a really positive, thoughtful, directed way, really taking responsibility for our thoughts and really directing our thoughts. And I think this card is a little bit of a cautionary tale saying, hey, are we really going to participate in bringing about the change that we want? We can't just look and think other people are going to bring the change. We have to bring ourselves to bear. We have to bring our minds to bear. And then the last card in the East, which represents the last card in the whole spread, is this, the circles come on, the cards come around. The last card in the outer circle, anyway, is the Page of Swords, which I think is encouraging because what it says is that that at the result of all the various things that are going to be starting in the new year is that we recommit ourselves to studying and paying attention and thinking about things in new ways, being willing to be a student of the mind, be a student of life, be a student of knowledge in order to figure out, how do we really take ourselves into the future. Now I want to see if there's a way that I can, let me just ask you guys to all unmute yourselves and let's see if that'll work without me messing with it. And once you do that, say something.
I'm here.
Okay, that's good.
Here.
Okay, Jane. All right, so it sounds like
Here.
it's working. So what I'd like
I'm here.
you guys to do is to look at these 4 cards and think about what I said, and also notice that you could easily see this as sort of a mini Celtic cross.
Mm-hmm.
So this could be very well be a mini reading within the whole reading. And this mini reading is about beginnings and endings. So what do you see in these 4 cards? Anybody?
New approach.
Good.
Richard, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Are those 4 cards positions 1, 2, 17, and 16?
I don't have the numbers right in front of me.
Okay.
That's what I would assume based on the layout if he started with 1,
Okay.
1, 2, 17, and 16.
Okay.
Yeah, I thank you for asking that question. I probably needed to write the numbers out so that I could remember what they are. But yeah, that's essentially correct. Any other thoughts about these 4 cards? Elizabeth, I know you got to have something.
Well, I mean, I agree with everything you said. I also think that the Chariot and the Fool, that there's, because I always see the Chariot, well, not always, but I see it often as like that internal spiritual journey, and the Fool there too. So I think that it's a balance of both mind and spirit, in the shifting of our perspectives and sort of where we're going to go in the next year.
Very good. I agree with you. In fact, the way I look at the Chariot is he sits halfway between, this is why he's number 5 in my deck. He sits halfway between the Strength and the Magician card, which are both number 1 cards. And so you get the ego at one end. The Magician represents focused ego. And at the other end, card number 9 is the Teacher and the Soul or Essence card. So he sits halfway between the soul and the ego, which of course is where we all find ourselves, is working on the balance between the mind or between the ego and the soul. And that, we're pulled along by forces both known and unknown. The forces that are known are represented by the white Sphinx. The forces that are unknown are represented by the dark Sphinx. And one of the things that's, I think, most challenging is for us to really start to recognize that even the things that we often associate with darkness are really the hand of spirit working in sort of mysterious ways. That's why I don't call the devil card the devil, I call him the dark angel, because what I see him doing is he provokes us to look at things that we don't want to look at. He provokes us to deal with things. So even the things that are difficult and painful in our lives are often where our greatest teaching, the greatest possibility for growth and development lies. So who else about these 4 cards?
I like the Page of Swords because it doesn't talk, to me, it doesn't speak of the warrior part of us. It's more of the thoughtful part. And we're going to have to use a lot of thinking to straighten out a lot of things.
Very good, Sandy. And I want to expand a little bit on a word that you used in there, and that is warrior. Warrior is a word that I associate with a Chariot. But I think most people don't think about the word warrior and really understand what that word is, because we are a society that has mercenaries and we have soldiers. And basically what mercenaries and soldiers do is they fight without necessarily really thinking through or really being aware of what it is that they fight for. A warrior is someone who fights, but is not his intention to do violence. He wants to use just enough force to protect the boundary. You know, like a warrior is someone who says, stop, when someone is being abusive or being overstepping their bounds or intruding on your space. A warrior does not have to get violent. All he has to do is be assertive and be firm. And I think the Chariot is very much about learning how to work with warrior energy in a healthy way. Now, my favorite story about this has to do with a Zen master who was in Tokyo, and he was specifically an Aikido Zen master, and he was on a subway train with a student one day, and they were walking through the cars, and they came into this one car on the subway, and there was a guy in there who was very big guy, very strong, and he was being very belligerent, and he was sort of yelling, and he was scaring everybody that was on the subway car, and people were cowering and backing away, and you know, everybody was pretty intimidated by this guy. And so the Aikido master walks over to the guy and he says, "Hey," and the guy goes, "What?" He says, "I think I know you." He says, "I think I saw you on this train, maybe 3 months ago, maybe 4 months ago. You were on this train with this very, very nice, beautiful woman. And, you know, it looked like you were very happy." He says, "I was very happy, but she died." He says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. That must be so hard for you. Let's sit down with me and talk to me a minute about what happened." And so the guy sits down with the Aikido master and they have a conversation, and everything calms down in the car. And, you know, later the guy gets up and he says, "I'll see you later." And the Aikido master and his student get off the subway car, and the student says, "Gee, you know, I thought for sure I was going to get to see you demonstrate your Aikido mastery today." He says, "You did."
Mhm.
You get
Yeah. Yeah.
he definitely asserted himself into the situation, and he diffused the situation. But even that is a really, that's a scary
Well,
thing to do.
we can have peaceful warriors and we can have the other kind too.
Okay, so let's move on. Now we're going to talk about the South. And the South is the seat of where our passions lie. What is it that, you know, that fires us up? What is it that we have desire about? You know, sexuality is often associated with the South, but it's not just that. It's anything that we're passionate about. And hopefully we are passionate about our work. If you're doing a job and you are, you know, you're doing it because you love it, because you have passion for it, because you have desire, you have a sense of that you're accomplishing something, then work becomes very fulfilling. And you know, it's not the kind of thing where you're just working for money. You're working because you enjoy what you're doing. And I know that all of you are, you know, want to have that kind of experience in your life. And the South is a place where we can look and sort of get a sense of where we're at with that on our journey. The first cards I want to talk about are the four, the Magician, the Nine of Pentacles, the Paradox card, and then the Queen of Pentacles. And then the last two, I want to mention this, the Universe card, which is a card on the right with the stars, that position is what I call the bridge. It's the card that sits between the East and the South, whereas the Queen of Swords sits between the South and the West. Now the bridge cards, and there's four of them in any medicine wheel spread, you're going to have them in four different positions. The bridge cards are often useful because they sort of tie the two things together. They tie the two areas together. So sometimes you can, it'll give you a piece of information in terms of how things fit together. So based upon what this reading is about, I want to go ahead and give you guys a chance to interpret these cards before I do. How would you read these cards, thinking about the fact that the South represents what are our passions? How are our passions expressing in our life in the coming year? And how is that in relationship to work?
So the first thing that comes to me,
Marilyn, what? Say that again.
Heather,
Heather.
the first thing that comes to me is that it's talking to us about looking at what we have created and how we have, been basically the instrument of our own destruction.
Yeah.
Like the Magician's really reminding me of that Disney, the Magician, and Fantasia, how he gets a little, like, that's the energy that came up for me. He's created a mess because he kind of stepped in where he wasn't supposed to. And, unfortunately, the bottom one makes me think of the economy just, being tilted on its side and not in a good way. And Paradox makes me think of just kind of like, it reminds me of like two birds that are falling together and circling around each other. They have the two dragons there, but
Yep.
just like spiral spinning and trying to get control of it. And then the fact that the top card is reversed just makes me think that in order to get anywhere, we have to take possession of our ownership of how we created. That's how it's come across to me.
Oh, that's really excellent. Thank you very much. That was good sharing. Who else wants to share?
Well, I agree with a lot of what Heather said. If it's about the new year and it's sort of a collective reading, then I agree with the fact that we're in this mess, because of our own capitalistic, isolating behaviors, right? We've separated ourselves from each other, and we don't recognize that we're all connected. I think that the Magician, most of these cards are reversed, and so I think the Magician showing up means that we have the ability to shift that, but I think that and the economic recovery based on the 9 of Pentacles is going to be slower than what we anticipate it will be. And I think that I think the Paradox, and then you talked about and I don't remember what your Galaxy card is called, the name of it.
The universe.
The universe, the bridge.
Yeah,
And the
universe.
Queen of Swords being a bridge is that our way through this is, I think the universe showing up is that we need to be connected to our dreams and to that soul, right? To that spirit, that and a balance of our mind is really important. I also think that woman, for whatever reason, she feels like Kamala Harris to me. And so that there's something about her that's going to help bring, or some divine feminine energy that's going to help bring that balance back in. But it's really up to us. And I think the Paradox, says that all, that we have control over this. And, are we going to shift our ways and our mindsets and recognize our connectedness and stop being greedy and work together as a society?
As I always think of, we need to be listening and receptive to other ideas so we can work together.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. I like this sharing. Does anybody else want to say anything before I chime in?
Yeah, Richard, I would. Somebody was had posted something this morning, and this everything in reversed here just reminded me of it. So I went back and looked, and you know how we say hold on for dear life. So switching that is let go for dear life. The two dragons remind me a bit of ice skaters in a long line, and they keep adding another person on that line, and they're going around in this big circle. And it's like if you don't really really hold on, you know, you're going to be spun off. And so with the things that are the way they are right now, I think we all know that we need to look at things in a totally different way. But the Queen of Swords there is kind of saying, yeah, you know, we don't have to like totally change everything, but things do need to be turned on their heads.
Very good. Vicki, I really, really appreciated what you had to say about the paradox card. You know, that card is the card that I struggled with the most in the creation of my deck. And it's the one I struggle with the most in terms of, you know, am I really conveying the idea? Are people getting the idea of what this card is about? And I heard in a lot of what you said that you are getting it. You are grokking it. Because it is exactly what you said. It is holding on for dear life and letting go for dear life. The paradox is very much about recognizing things that we see as opposites are intrinsically linked. And that we have to find a way to understand how these things work together. And that to think that we can have just one without the other is naive. And paradox challenges us to learn how to relate to the dark as well as to the light. When I came back from New Mexico after living down there on a ranch in a spiritual community, which was really it was a very difficult experience for me for a lot of different reasons. Gosh, I don't know how much, there's so much to this story. I'll try to be brief. When I was down there, the animal that I was working with, the alliance that I had was with the badger. Now, a badger, he's kind of aggressive when you corner him. And, you know, he's very much about staking out his territory and asking that his space be respected and not intruded upon. And that was very much my thing, was where is my space in this basically matriarchal community? And there really wasn't any space. And I actually had a badger show up. And through a series of unfortunate events, I ended up having this badger be rotten. And so what we ended up doing is we wrapped this badger in chicken wire and hung him on a pole. My God, the stink from that thing wafted across that ranch for like 2 months. I thought it was an interesting metaphor because that's the way I felt about my masculinity in that environment where I was the only male and there was like 26 females. And I really felt like it had nothing to do with that number, but I did think that one of the problems with that community is they were really struggling with how to deal with masculine energy within themselves as well as externally. And I eventually, what I had to do is stand up and say, I can't be here. It doesn't feel like I fit. And so I left. And when I left, I came back to Colorado and I had this other really strange thing happen where this guy walks into this room where I was working and said, I don't know why, but I thought of you when this happened. I said, what? He says, well, I was driving along the road and this great horned owl just fell out of the sky. And I just had a feeling you would know what to do with it. So I took the owl and I did some ritual and helped and buried it. And I actually got a fan out of that. But the key thing is it really showed up for me that what I needed to do was I had to learn how to look into the darkness, because that's what owls do. They see the truth in the darkness. And that, I think, is very much one of the things that I try to do as a teacher, is I try to shed light in areas of life that are traditionally dark, because we need to stop being afraid of the dark and figure out how to work with the darkness in our own souls and in life itself. Because you think about it, there's a lot of demonizing that's going on right now, and I think that happens on both sides of most of the arguments that I see. Is there's this tendency to demonize the opposite, and that sort of friction between the two poles, nothing ever gets resolved. If we're going to move forward, we have to figure out how to resolve our differences instead of demonizing each other. Now, coming back to the magician, I really liked what Heather had to say about this, because the thing that you notice when the magician is reversed, what it says to me is he's not in alignment between the earth and the heavens. He's not tapping into heavenly power. He's somehow, his magic is distorted, or maybe it's bent for the wrong purposes. And we could think of that as that's what's going on in the past, is that our will, the magician is very much about will, to manifest has been very much about earthly. It's been earthly motivated. How can we, more for me kind of a thing. And unfortunately, because of that, I think that the Nine of Pentacles indicates that just the opposite has happened. Instead of creating prosperity, our negative thinking, our fear thinking has created the opposite to happen, to where now the Queen of Pentacles reversed, we've lost our ability to be receptive to the fact that things are going to work out, that the universe is totally supportive. But we have to figure out what the laws and principles are if we're going to be in alignment with the universe. And so the Queen of Swords reminds us that we have to set ourselves free from what we're in bondage to, what old ideas, thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs that keep us from really moving forward. And the universe card, that shows up to remind us that anything is possible. So let's move on. So next, we're going to talk about the West, which is the seat of relationships, emotion, and intuition. So if you're doing a reading for somebody, you can look at each of these quadrants and you can get a sense of, in the South, what's going on with their work, in the West, what's going on with their relationships. But remember, relationships are larger than just romantic. Sometimes it's family relationships, sometimes it's work relationships, sometimes it's relationships we have with spirit. And the West is also the place where emotions are in the forefront, and intuition really serves us if we can listen to it. So what cards show up in the West? Well, the first card in the inner circle is the 6 of Pentacles. And then we have the Essence card reversed. And then we have the Page of Cups. And then we have the 4 of Swords. Now, before we look at the bridge cards, well, we've already seen one of the bridge cards. The Queen of Swords is the bridge between the South and the West. So what do we see here? Remember that the 6 of Pentacles is the inner circle. The Soul Essence card is in the position. Now, think of it also as sort of like being on the bottom. And very often the card that's in the bottom of a cross represents the work that needs to be done. What is our work that we need to do? And then the card on the left, well, how are we in relationships? How are we relating to each other in the world? And then the card in the north is sort of a way out, but it also is, how do we bring in, through intuition, how do we bring in spiritual guidance? So those are just a few little ideas I wanted to give to you guys. And now I want to turn it over and ask you, what do you see?
Well, for me, it just seems like it's saying that we need to learn to take care of others before ourselves to get out of this, that it's not going to be about fixing us particularly as including everyone, like a unity consciousness.
Very good. Yeah. One thing that's interesting about the Six of Pentacles is the role, the two people that are on the card. One obviously is rich and prosperous. And in other decks, what you see him doing in the Rider-Waite, for instance, you see him sort of extending, and he's passing out some money to the other guy who is obviously poor and down on his luck and destitute. And the guy actually has the scales in his hand, as opposed to what this guy is doing, which is he's holding a cup. But there's definitely there's a sense of, in this kind of situation, there's roles. Each of these people, in their own way, is playing a role. The rich guys, you could say he's somewhat ostentatious. His clothes are very, rich and luxurious. And he just has that air about him of somebody that has money. Whereas the beggar is definitely, who knows what, what it is that's behind the clothes that he's wearing. But there's definitely, he's putting on airs to a certain extent, which of course, if you've ever had an interaction with somebody in that kind of a position, that there's a certain amount of, there's a way that they interact with us. There's a way that they present themselves. They present themselves as, poor, pitiful me. And it's very much a role. So the point I think I'm trying to make about this card is that one of the things we have to watch out for in the kind of thing that Heather was just saying is that, like, we have to have a sense of, it can't just be about what I want and about my prosperity. I have to, be willing to share with those around me. Is we have to be careful that we don't get into condescension. We don't get into the, I'm the luxurious guy and I feel sorry for this poor, pitiful person. One of the things that I run into is I have some friends that are somewhat rich, and I've talked to them about social programs, and they have an attitude that anybody that's destitute is just trying to work the system, and they have no sense of that actually helping somebody might actually raise them up, as opposed to it just is like ciphering off their riches. Of course, that's sort of a naivete. What do you guys got? Go ahead.
Well, can I add to that? Because
Go ahead.
I love your Six of Pentacles, because what I see in that card is, they're both standing on equal ground. Obviously, the rich man is standing in front of the money, and so to me that represents that the money controls him, and the poor man is standing behind it, and so he actually has a healthier relationship with the money, because he it doesn't control him, and so learning that, I think in this spread, it's really about us learning that balance and recognizing that, we're both on the same ground. It's just about how are we seeing the world? I love this card.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Great sharing. Who else?
The Six of Pentacles. It reminds me a bit of the Caduceus. And because of the snake going up on both ends, I see a head at the bottom and a head at the top.
Oh, wow. Very good catch. I missed that.
Yeah.
Oh,
That is
cool.
very cool. And what do you think of that?
So there's healing. There can be healing, for both of these people, with this balance there. So anyway.
That's way cool. I had not seen that. And you've just added to my toolbox. So thank you.
I almost see him as the same person.
Oh, what an interesting.
Yeah, shadow.
like the shadow self, the ego, I don't know if those are the right terms, but he almost looks to me of two parts of the same one.
Agree.
Well, that's certainly an interesting insight, and I do think that often in life we do play both sides of the same coin. And that, and you know, because the Six of Pentacles is a six, there's definitely, to me, an underlying healing energy. And you guys are sort of inferring that in the way you're describing the relationship between these two personas, which very well can be two aspects of the self. And, you know, one of the lessons, of course, is that when we have prosperity is to not become overly inflated, to not let the ego take that and say, I'm better than, which the ego loves to do. Or contrary to that is when we're down on our luck and we're in that place of destitution, to not get overly identified with that, and to understand that, you know, like the Wheel of Fortune is a circle, the pentacles are all circles, and that the circle is always turning. Sometimes things are really, we're on top of the circle, sometimes we're on the bottom getting ground into the dirt. And that both sides of this is part of who we are. And having that kind of insight, wouldn't that really help us in all of our relationships if we have that sense of compassion? I have a friend who's had some really significant challenges recently that caused him actually to end up being hospitalized because he had somewhat of a nervous breakdown. And it would be really easy to get into an attitude of, oh, this guy's sick, you know. But one of the things that I tried really hard to do when I was around him is to treat him as like he was my friend. He's always been my friend, and just because he's been through some rough times, he's not any different in my mind. And that having an opportunity to just give him that sense of, no, that's not who you are. I don't identify you with your struggles. I've certainly been there myself. I've had many struggles in my life where I was down and out on my luck, and it was so hard to not identify when you're have a bad turn of fortune. Okay, so what about the Soul Essence card? All right, let me talk about that a little bit because it's one of my new cards, and I'm really hoping that people are starting to get a sense of how this would apply. Well, we're talking about relationships. Now, I think the best relationships are the ones where we really are working together to grow. We're working together to evolve. That, I think relationships are evolutionary drivers. And that when we get into relationship, and it could be not just romantic relationship, it can be a work relationship. When we get into a relationship in which there is not a sense of respect or not a sense of seeing the larger truth, because the soul is like, it's like the spirit energy within us, and that energy doesn't necessarily relate to this whole thing about money that our society seems to operate on. It is motivated by a different energy. It's motivated by the energy of evolution, personal evolution, and also societal evolution. And if our society is too focused on the monetary, which of course we know is the tendency of our society, if we're too focused on the monetary, then we're out of sync with the larger agenda of evolution. We're out of sync with the larger agenda of spirit, which is that everyone be self-actualized. That's what in a way, that's what the Tarot is about, is self-actualization. And that is what our lives are about, is our whole lives in some way or another, we're about, you know, really becoming conscious, really becoming more and more aware of the true nature of the universe. And to do that, we have to have a sense of that eternal space within ourselves that's untouched by things. And if we're not listening to or thinking about the soul in our relationships or in our work relationships, or in the way our emotions express themselves, then it's going to lead to trouble. And of course, I think that's why, think of it, the fact that the Page of Cups, he's on the outer circle. He's really on the western extreme of the circle. And he is not looking in his cup because the card's reversed. He's not looking at his emotions. He's not learning. So this card is saying to us in the coming year, it's all well and good if things start to change, but if we don't understand how we, the so-called enlightened people, are the people that are, aware, how did we get caught in this whole larger scenario? And some of that is by not paying attention to the emotional messages that we're getting. I believe that all emotions that we have are guidance from spirit. Love leads us towards where our growth is. And if we're not listening to love, or we're not listening to our anger or our fear or whatever other emotion we might have, if we're not looking at them and trying to make sense of them and what the messages are for us personally, if we're talking about, those people, they're the problem, and if we could just get rid of those people, everything would be fine. And both sides in different ways will say that kind of message. If you listen very carefully, you can hear that that's very pervasive in the whole of our society, not just with those who think differently than ourselves, but even in the new age. It's really easy for people to go, we're enlightened, and those people out there, they're going to the gun show and buying guns and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that's counterproductive. That's not going to get us where we need to go. And therefore, we definitely need to be willing to do what the Four of Swords is indicating, which is set aside our preconceived ideas and look at things with fresh eyes. I think that that card's reverse is an indication of us recognizing that we haven't been doing that we've been looking at and dealing with our relationships too much out of the old ideas and thoughts and beliefs and attitudes that we've had, and not being willing to really look at them with new eyes. Any thoughts, attitudes? What do you guys, anything?
Well, I just want to say that I love the Soul Essence card, and I think it's one of those cards that, whether it's upright or reversed, there's still like a really beautiful message in it. I think that it's reversed. It's almost like that energy is coming down from spirit, and we are feeding that in, like we are creating a stronger, more balanced relationship with our earth and with each other, especially because it's the it's the rainbow tribe, it's all encompassing of everything. And so I love that card in that position. I think it's beautiful regardless.
Well, thank you. And I want to point out to you, and some of you may not know this, that the rainbow is representative of the spectrum of emotions. All of those different colors represent different feelings that we have. And so, so you're right. All of those feelings are coming to us. Now the trick is, are we going to reverse that Page of Cups and start to look at what those emotions are trying to say to us about ourselves and our relationship with our world? Anybody, anything?
It almost feels like there's more introspection that needs to happen.
Oh, I totally think you're right about that. Okay, shall we move on?
Yes.
All right, now we're going to talk about the North, and this is the place you want to look at if you use the medicine wheel spread. This is the place you want to look at if you're looking for, how do I start to help the client? What is it that they can do? What is it they need to do that will, where's help available to them? Now remember that
Mm.
there's some bridge cards coming up, and I'll talk about those. I don't know if we covered those yet, but let's talk about these 4 in the north. The uppermost card, I think, really represents how is the person seeing spirit? How are they seeing the divine energy in their lives? And I think for some people in the coming year, there's going to be a sense of, feeling betrayed. Why isn't Spirit showing us the way out of this difficulty we find ourselves in? And that reminds me of this question that you hear people ask all the time. And that is, how could God allow this thing to happen? And if you don't like the word God, substitute spirit or whatever, but you know what I'm talking about. People say that there's sort of this, if God is just, if God is fair, or spirit is fair, or the force is fair, why do these bad things happen? And my answer to that question is, you're right. How could you? Because how can spirit work in the world except through us? That is our purpose. That is what we're about. And instead of thinking that there's some sort of, and it's just sort of like, this, when people come for readings, they have this attitude of, like there's some sort of magical force out there that's going to fix everything or make everything right. And then if you really are doing your job, what you do is you help the person to recognize that the only way that they're going to get out of the mess that they find themselves in is by figuring out what they need to do, how they need to live their lives differently. And the cards invariably give them guidance in terms of what it is that they need to do. Sometimes the cards give validation, which is really nice when you get one of those validation readings. Those are really positive and wonderful and fun. But more often than not, the cards are saying to people, okay, guys, here's your work. And when we say, how could Spirit allow? The answer is, how can we allow these things to go on?
Right.
We have to figure out what our capabilities are. That's what Spirit wants us to do. And the good news is the 2 cups behind the figure remind us there's still opportunity. There's lots of opportunity for happiness and joy and working our way through the current challenges that we have. But look at what's on the bottom, the Emperor reversed.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this is a really interesting card because, I see him as secular authority, but he also represents that part of ourselves that rules. When we're, and you can't rule a kingdom or whatever you want to call it, a country. You can't rule a country without being vigilant. And to what extent do all of us, no matter who we are, to what extent are we not being vigilant? To what extent are we not paying attention to little things that we can do? To what extent are we not willing to stand up for what we believe and try to find a gentle and gentle warrior way, peaceful warrior way of speaking the truth to begin to make the shift in consciousness, instead of assuming that them damn people are never going to listen to the reason or whatever. So that card really says that Spirit wants us to look at and think about how we're not ruling. And it doesn't mean that we're the ultimate authority, but it means we need to accept responsibility for what we are capable of being responsible for and figuring out how to do what we can do. And he's got the rams on his throne, which reminds us of Aries, which is cardinal fire, which is the initiatory. We need to start initiating new directions, to give new forms to new things. And the 2 cards on the wings, the 2 of swords reversed, which I think is a wonderful card to have reversed. It's one of those I think is better reversed than it is upright. Because upright, it means someone's holding on to 2 conflicting ideas and their heart is closed off. literally the cross of the swords is right directly over the heart, indicating that, you know, their heart is not open. They're not getting any information from spirit because they're holding on to conflicting ideas and not really looking for the third alternative that might be the way out of the mess. They can't see their way out because they're in conflict. But if we can set down one or the other of the conflicting ideas, we can take the blindfold off. And the fact that this card is reversed is an indication that we are starting to look at spirit with new eyes. We're starting to let go of the old way we've identified spirit and starting to see spirit, you know, in a completely new way. You know, one of my favorite books is The Source by James Michener. And the great thing about that book is that they tell the story about how men in different times in history, in all these different eras, that they looked at the world and they looked at their relationship with spirit, and they had completely different viewpoints or attitudes about spirit. So when you look at that story, and it's a big book, it's a long read, but when you read that, all of those different variations, what you begin to understand is our relationship with spirit has always been evolving. Why should we think that that is not going on today as much as it was 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago when Jesus walked the earth, or 3,000 years ago when Buddha walked the earth, or whatever time you want to pick? It's always ongoing, but it's the difficulty of when you live in interesting times, it's hard to see, you know, what is actually going on. And the Joker, well, you know, what this card is about is like, sometimes you have to be able to laugh at things and not take things too seriously. And sometimes what you have to do is you have to exaggerate things to the extreme of black and white. And it's by exaggerating the melodrama, you know, you start to see the absurdity of her melodramatic attitude. But maybe what he's suggesting to us is we need to look at things in a more gray way. We need to stop thinking in terms of good guys and bad guys, and winners and losers, or right and wrong, and start to see that somehow or another we need to reconcile some of the things that are going on in our world today, and try to find a way to come up with a solution that really takes both camps into account. You know, one of the things that drives me nuts about politics is how the one side will come into office and they pass all sorts of legislation that they think is in the best interest of the country. And then the other side, who disagrees with them, when they come into office, they do their best to overturn the legislation and to put in opposite legislation. And then they go and they do this thing where they pass it back and forth every 4 to 8 years. They pass things and then they overturn things. They pass things and they overturn things. So that if you really look at a recent history, it doesn't appear as if our government has accomplished a damn thing, no matter who's been in office, because of that tendency to just, you know, not figure out how do we balance the two positions. And that's a hard thing to do. It is really hard to try to keep our hearts and minds open when somebody's being hostile. But I think nonetheless, that's the kind of thing that has to happen.
On that card, I get the vibe of stop watching the show.
Oh, that's cool.
Like, we need to stop with all of the glitz and glamour that's happening in front of us and maybe look behind the curtain.
Ah, that's way cool.
Yeah.
Or quit seeing things as black and white.
Mhm.
Right, very good. What do you got, Vicki?
I agree with the first comment about look what's behind you, from that Five of Cups. Look on what in context of us personally, what's the shadow piece behind the guy with cups. What's he got going on back there? And we need to look at, the light. That's a moon card, right? Kind of. So nothing's really shining a light on any particular thing, but there is a shadow behind him, as you see on the grass there. I think we need to look at both pieces.
Yeah, that's really good, Vicki. There's a lot there than what you just said. So let's start with the fact that you said it's a moon card. Well, the thing you have to remember about the moon is it's indirect sunlight. You're not standing in the light or the enlightenment. You're standing in the dark. And what does it mean to be in the dark? It means you're not seeing.
Let's see.
Your things are hidden. But because they're in the darkness doesn't necessarily mean that they're malevolent. Like I said, that whole thing about the owl, it's like what the owl medicine is meant for me is learning how to look into dark areas. And trust me, I have looked at some really strange places. And in order to understand, in order to get a deeper recognition of what is really going on. So sometimes, it's like when you're a little kid and you're scared of the dark and you think the boogeyman's going to come get you until one day you decide to shut the door and turn out the light and say, all right, boogeyman, if you're going to come get me. And of course, once you do that, then you never worry about it again because nothing happened. And so, yes, it's in the shadow. Shadow doesn't always mean something evil or bad. In fact, oftentimes what's in shadow, Carl Jung says that what's in our shadow is often our greatest strength. Our greatest potential is in shadow, and that it lies there waiting for us to activate it. And that's why it's so juicy, because it's almost as if it's our destiny to recover. And think about it. That's the great work. That's the great spiritual work, is bringing things out of the darkness into the light. And, not to get too metaphysical, because that's what science does. It looks at some sort of problem that goes on in the world and says, all right, well, there's got to be something going on here. This isn't just chaos. There has to be some sort of principle that's operating. And if we look carefully, maybe we can figure it out. And that's why people like Louis Pasteur come up with this idea of sterilizing his instruments. Or, somebody else figures out that malaria is related to the mosquito. They look for what's the principle at work. Instead of thinking there's some sort of malevolent evil force in the universe, they go, well, somehow or another, this is a challenge to us to figure out what the law and principle is. So scientists bring truth out of the darkness. They bring understanding out of the darkness of ignorance into the light. And once it's in the light, then we all have access to that understanding. And we can all do something with that understanding.
But they have to keep an open mind to do that.
Oh, gosh. And that is not an easy thing to do, is it, Sandy?
No, it is not.
No. In one of my trainings, well, still continuing, as I work with a client, and we're working with a particular issue of their story. We all have our story. They get to a place, and then I try to shift things, and I'll ask them, so that thing that you're talking about, what is its gift to you?
Yes.
And they get real quiet for quite some time, and I just shut up, I just let them process through that, and they come up with their own answer. It's quite a cool question.
That is excellent, Vicki. In fact, it sort of reminds me of sometimes I feel like a big fraud, believe it or not, as a tarot card reader. I look at some people like Elizabeth, and I think, oh my God, she's so much more intuitive than I am. She gets so much more information. How the hell do I do readings? And I think sometimes that I just sort of bluff my way through it. But that's not really what's going on, is that everybody has a different way of accessing the truth. and you have to find your own way. And sometimes when I'm doing a reading, I'll look at something and I have a sense of what I think might be going on. And my mind says, oh, this person has a relationship issue. And my ego says, oh, well, that means it's a romantic relationship. And my other part of me says, no, we don't know that. So let's just talk about, and I start talking about, so I see there's this challenge in your life and there's some sort of friction you're having with somebody. And the person will go, yes, that's absolutely right. And then they start to tell me their story. And it's not at all what I thought it was. That's why I think sometimes I'm not that intuitive, but I'm good at this because I know the symbols and the cards, and I am intuitive. I just do it in a different way.
Sure.
I don't necessarily get the same information that everybody does. And everybody has their own relationship. And I think if you didn't have some degree of fear, and that's what I'm just saying to you right now, is I still have fear every time I do a reading. Every time. I'm still worried. And I think if I didn't have that, that's when I'd really be worried. You know, you gotta try to keep your heart
Richard, you
and mind open.
said something to me one time about what is this trying to teach me? What is this circumstance trying to teach me? What lesson do I have to learn?
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't tell me you're not intuitive.
That's just part of my process, is I have to go through that, jump through that hoop. Oh, we're all pretty silly in our own way, aren't we?
And that's what's beautiful, is that we all connect differently, and that's, and we access that information differently, but all truth is truth. And I love what you do and how you do it, and how you connect to the cards and to people. So you should know.
Well, thank you, dear. And you've come to see me for many, many, many years, so I know I've got to be doing something right. All right. So let's see what's next. Oh yeah. Now here are the two bridge cards. Now look at the one that
Oh boy.
on the right. The Temperance card sits between the north and the west. So it sits between our connection with spirit and our relationships. And what do you see going on in this card? The Temperance card, the way I describe it is that if you have a conflict that appears to be unresolvable, like fire and water, that's literally what you see in this card. She's pouring water onto lion, which is a fire sign, and fire onto the eagle, which is an esoteric symbol for Scorpio, which is a water sign. So she is blending fire and water in two different directions. And she's able to do that. And when you look at her, it's obvious, with the wings, that she's an angel. So what that says to me is that things that we think we cannot resolve, in our mundane worldly sense, when we are able to give it over to our higher selves or give it over to higher principles, because there's a guy named Lon Duchette who wrote this really, really interesting tome, and I mean like a really, really thick book, on the angels and the archangels. And he talks about how all of the different angels, basically what they are is they are a manifestation of an attribute, like Michael's truth, or Raphael is love, or I don't remember, all of them, but all of the angels in different ways represent attributes or characteristics of the divine. They are close to the absolute. They're close to the creator. And an attribute, of course, is something that's very close to spirit, because in a sense, an attribute like truth or beauty or justice or love, any of those attributes are whole and complete and perfect manifestations of the divine energy, the perfection of the universe, the finished kingdom of the absolute. And that, okay, so what is this card about? It's about when we get stuck in a mundane way, that sometimes we have to reach up towards a heavenly attribute, attribute of truth or love or justice. And we have to recognize that if by embracing that energy, or bringing it more consciously into our lives, we can reconcile these problems that appear to be irreconcilable, like the fire and water. But the card's reversed, so it says that in our relationship to the world at large, not just our mundane, little small relationships, but to the world at large, that we're not doing this. We're not calling upon the divine to assist us, and I think that's, like there's that ancient Chinese curse, may you be born in interesting times. And I think that is one of the consequences of the times in which we live. The old order, the old way of looking at spirit has broken down. That mythology just doesn't hold water like it once did. But unfortunately, then you have science coming along and saying, well, the best thing for us to do is to just throw the whole thing out, because it always leads to trouble. Well, it certainly has been, there's been a lot of religion. There's been a lot of violence done in the name of religion. We all know this. And we all know that there's definitely a dark side to religion. But that doesn't mean that there's a dark side to spirituality. And that what spirituality is about is an ongoing, evolving relationship with the force, if you will, or Allah or Buddha or whatever you want to call it. I sometimes call it Frank. Let me be frank with you. It's like the Temperance card reminds us that when we get stuck in a mundane way, if we connect in with a higher self, in whatever way we can do that, in whatever way we can find a healthy, comfortable way to do that, then we can start to move forward. But as I said, we live in interesting times in which there's this tendency for people not to think that there's a way to access that without necessarily going back into the old ways of thinking. And I've known many people that, have walked away from conventional religion, and then they found themselves going back because they had to have something. And unless we find a way to rethink and redefine our connection with spirit, we are going to go back to the old ways, which only get us just so far. We have to start having innovation. And that's the challenge of the times in which we live. And hopefully all of us, by working with the Tarot and working with the public, we're helping to plant seeds with people that will awaken within them, that they can have a really wonderful, loving, and joyful connection with spirit, and that spirit is available to them. I think that that's the great thing about working with the Tarot, is that every time you do it, in a way, what you're saying is, I trust that there is a spiritual energy in the universe and that I can access that for good. And darned if that isn't the case. It just seems to work when you are open to it and are trusting in it. It does work for you. And I believe that spirit will support us in all the areas of our lives. And spirit wants us to be happy. When we're happy, spirit's happy. When we have joy, spirit has joy. When we have a sense of connection with all of nature has a sense of connection with us. Dot sort of makes fun of me sometimes because, we'll go on these little walks and I talk to the squirrels, and the squirrels talk back to me. We have these little funny little, yammering at each other, and sometimes the squirrel will come up and take the peanut out of my hand. Sometimes it won't, but I certainly have fun just sort of like interacting with it and going, hey, I like the fact that you're part of my world. And the same with all the other creatures. So that card just is saying, we have to have a sense that's available to us. And if you notice that the angel's got 1 foot on land and 1 foot in the water, which is to say that, we do have to have a sense of, being grounded, but we also have to be willing to tap into the intuitive. We have to be willing to tap into the pool of the flowing pool of emotional guidance and spiritual guidance that's available to us. Because water in the tarot represents both spirit and emotion. And that's one thing we should always try to remember. Now, on the other side, we got the Three of Pentacles. And that bridge position is between the North, which is our connection with spirit, and the East, which is beginnings and endings. And I think this one is just saying, hey, you know what? If we're going to go forward, if we want to build something, and that card's very much about building something, we have to have a vision. We have to use our minds. But we also have to have our heart engaged. And we also have to have our bodies engaged. We have to come up with something practical. And if we get those three things working together, then we can build something. We can have something be physically practical, emotionally connected, and intellectually sound. And I think that card helps us to understand that. Now we're going to come to, this is the last two cards, and this is what's in the center. And so this is, in a way, the 10 of Cups there is like the significator, and then it's crossed by the 7 of Wands. So what do you guys get, that being in the very center of the whole spread?
Happiness will only come if we stop fighting against everything.
Oh, very nice. I like that.
Right.
We got a lot of work to do.
Well, yeah, but if the road is long, it's best to get up early. Or the other way to say this is that, yes, we have work to do, but Spirit never entrusts us with anything we're not capable of handling.
Uh-huh.
If there's work to be done, then we are capable of doing that work.
Mm-hmm.
We have to trust that. We have to trust that we have a connection with Source, and Source will work with us. I think that's, once again, I think that's one of the great gifts about being a tarot card reader, is you get to have this dialogue almost on a daily basis with Spirit, where you really have a sense of just how loved you are and how present Spirit is in your life. There's this, I'm working on this book. It's called Return to Paradise. And one of the things I'm trying to write about is that redefining the Garden of Eden story and looking at it in a totally different way. So we stop thinking that the earth is punishment and start thinking of the earth as paradise. And it really is paradise from the right perspective. You can see the earth as paradise. My life is paradise sometimes when I'm open to that. And, there's a song, you might want to go and find it on the internet. It's called Let Me Walk Through Paradise by Melvin Lee. It's this woman, Hawaiian woman, and it's a really beautiful song. And, you can just sort of imagine having a really wonderful, intimate relationship with the Creator, and not a fearful relationship, but a relationship of mutual respect. I'd like to say that we all talk about and we all sort of connect with Source in terms of like, what can Source do for us? And do we ever stop to give thought to the fact that we actually might be doing something for Source? I think we do. I think every time you do your work, you do a reading, you're of service to somebody, you are serving Source. You are doing what Spirit put you on this earth to do. And the Spirit loves you for that. And that, really letting yourself feel that sense of you are loved. And that's why your readings work. And if you really trust that, then you don't have to fight with everybody to have your place in the world. You can be in the world in a peaceful way. You can be that peaceful warrior. But the other thing about the 10 of Cups is, one of the things about this card is that it's like the happy family. But one of my friends said that one of the problems with this card is that there's a little bit of pretentiousness to it. There's a little bit of it's staged. We're like presenting to the world like, oh, we are really much more tolerant than we really are. or
Right.
we're much more loving than we really are. So this card is maybe reminding us that we have to work on, and if we're enlightened, we have to work on it even harder than the people that are completely in the dark, because we have a little bit of light. We have to work harder on figuring out how to be more accepting and supportive of others in the world. You know, how do we relate to them in a loving way? Any other thoughts about these cards, guys?
Well, I just want to say that with the last screenshot that you had, the north, what I saw in that, and you know, maybe this is just my victim advocate popping up, but that the Five of Cups is about, we have a lot of people who are isolated, and there aren't any rules, which is the emperor, right? But so the structure that we've known has been turned around, and I think that, you know, next year we're going to have to deal with people and their trauma and their PTSD, that, you know, because there's been so much loss and so much chaos. And I often see the Two of Swords as a card of anxiety, and so then I think the Temperance is exactly that, that need to get back to spirit and to bring that spirituality in. And then the Three of Pentacles, I see that as well as us working together, and that, you know, it's the wise man, it's the wanderer, and it's the religious man, you know, or the businessman, and that merging all of those ideas and becoming more supportive of each other. And then moving forward, the Ten of Cups reversed is that we have to look at how we see community, and seeing community and seeing our community as our family in a new way. And I don't see the Wands card necessarily as a struggle. It almost feels like people have a choice of how they pull that passion and that, you know, that fire and that spiritual connection. You know, which one are they going to choose, and how are they going to regain mastery of their own lives and of our community?
Yeah, really. You know, the idea with this guy is that he is being true to his passion, to his fire. It's not to say that all those other wands are wrong or bad. It's just the essence of this card is you must remain true to what you know is your motivation. You must be, you should be true to your passion. And that doesn't have to be win-lose.
Right.
You know, and I liked all of that stuff that you said. And I think talking about the victim thing is really, really important, because we are loaded with victims. I mean, you know, a lot of these people that are on the street are PTS people because they were warriors. And how did they become warriors? Their country called them, and they said, all right, I'll go serve.
Right.
And then they are subjected to this incredibly horrible experience, and then they go, well, thank you very much, you're out of the military now. I'll share with you one little story, and that is, one time I was driving on I-70, and all of a sudden all the cars came to a sudden abrupt stop, and luckily I didn't hit anybody, or nobody hit me. And we sat there for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then I saw there were some people running around, and I knew that something had happened, but I didn't know what it was. And after about 10 minutes, the traffic started to move. Well, as I moved up and around, there had been a motorcycle accident, and there was a body laying on the ground, and it was perfectly clear to me that the person laying on the ground was dead. There was no question whatsoever that I mean, it wasn't bloody or anything like that. It was probably a broken neck or a broken spine or something, but it was very clear to me that person was dead. I could not sleep for 3 days. I could not get that image out of my mind. It was severely traumatizing for me to see that. and it stayed with me. Can you imagine going into combat with 5 or 6 of your closest friends and having your friends die around you, or killing someone?
Or having to kill someone.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What could be more traumatizing than that? And we minimize the impact of that. No wonder these guys are, or girls, because it's women are in combat now. These people are coming home and they're messed up. And what did they say, that there were more men that committed suicide that served in Vietnam than the people that actually died in country.
And
Yeah.
we're creating a whole new, generation of that, because we have to think about, now our doctors and our nurses who have literally had to, and we're gearing back up for it, to choose who lives and who dies.
Yeah.
And who have had to be there when people pass because they're not allowing families there. And so, and then our kids, right? Our kids that are being forced to wear masks and not be able to go to school and isolated. And so I think the trauma related to this pandemic has not yet shown, because we're still in the middle of it, right? We're still in that war, we're still in that battle. And so people haven't had time to process all the things that they've seen and heard and felt and see, and just witnessed, whether it's intuitively or in person. And so I think that's where the 5 of Cups, for next year comes up, is that we're going to see more of that manifesting. And, what are we going to do? How are we going to come together as a community and take care of each other? Because it's one of my good friends is the chief medical officer at Aurora South, and he, the stories that he's told me, I know he has trauma and or PTSD, and that we're not talking about those things yet.
Yeah, that's all really, really right on. That's definitely, there's a lot going on. But let's just close with this thought. And just, yes, all of that is true. And Spirit never gives us anything that we're not capable of handling. But don't think about, how am I going to handle this? And am I able to handle this or not? Just show up and do the best you can with what you got, and trust the process. You don't have to know it all. You don't have to have a sense of it all. You just got to be willing to show up. And I think Tarot is very much about showing up.
And have an agreement with ourselves and Spirit to lift each other up and to act from a place of love, because that's what's going to heal us.
I agree.
Well, I hope you guys are getting that out of this class, because I certainly am.
Yeah.
Love
so
it.
good.
And love you.